The screams echoed through the corridors of Colony 7 as the Variks dropships descended like metallic vultures. Captain Jake Morrison pressed his back against the blast-scarred wall, his pulse rifle clutched tight against his chest. Through the shattered viewport, he could see the insectoid forms of the Variks warriors scuttling across the colony's outer perimeter, their mandibles clicking with predatory satisfaction. "Captain!" Sergeant Emma Cole's voice crackled through his cum. "Unit, they've breached the eastern barricade. We're being overrun." Jake gritted his teeth. Colony 7 had been humanity's furthest outpost, a testament to their species' relentless push into the unknown. Now it was becoming their tomb. The Variks Empire had struck with unprecedented force, their biomechanical armies sweeping across human space like a plague of locusts. "Fall back to the central hub," Jake ordered, his voice steady despite the chaos. "We'll make our stand there." But even as he spoke, Jake knew the truth. They were outnumbered 10-1, cut off from reinforcements, and running low on ammunition. The Variks had planned this assault perfectly, timing it when the colony's defenses were at their weakest. The sound of chittering grew closer. Jake peered around the corner and saw them towering Variks warriors with their segmented armor and razor-sharp limbs. Behind them walked something that made his blood run cold. A Variks science commander, its multifaceted eyes gleaming with intelligence and malice. "Interesting," the science commander spoke in perfect, chilling English. "These humans fight with such intensity, such passion. Most curious." Jake raised his rifle, but a neural disruptor blast caught him in the chest. As consciousness faded, he heard the science commander's voice growing distant. "Collect the fighters, the ones who showed the greatest resilience. We have much to learn from them." When Jake awoke, he found himself in a sterile white chamber aboard a Variks bioship. Restraints held him to an examination table while alien instruments hummed around him. The science commander stood nearby, studying holographic displays of human genetic sequences. "Ah, you're awake," the creature said without looking up. "Captain Morrison, isn't it? Your service record makes for fascinating reading. 17 successful missions, 43 confirmed kills, and most importantly 0 retreats. You never run, do you, Captain?" Jake strained against his bonds. "What do you want?" "Want?" The science commander's mandibles clicked in what might have been amusement. "We want to understand what makes you human so persistent, so annoyingly difficult to eliminate. You're individually weaker than us, technologically inferior, and vastly outnumbered. Yet you continue to resist." The examination began with painful genetic sampling. Jake felt needles pierce his skin, extracting blood, tissue, and bone marrow. The science commander observed everything with clinical fascination. "Your species possesses something we lack," the alien continued. "A willingness to sacrifice for abstract concepts. Loyalty, honor, love. We've studied your psychological profiles. Captain, you would die for strangers simply because they share your homeworld. Fascinating and yet efficient. Every great journey starts with a few brave explorers. Sci-fi stellar conflict is just beginning, and your support means everything. If you're hungry for HFY battles and tales of human valor against alien might, hit subscribe. It's free, and it helps us bring these frontlines to you." Hours passed. Jake drifted in and out of consciousness as the aliens harvested his genetic material. He caught fragments of their conversations, discussions about neural pathway mapping and behavioral encoding. The science commander seemed particularly interested in the brain scans taken during moments of extreme stress. "The human capacity for adaptation under pressure is remarkable," the creature mused. "Their hormone production during combat situations actually enhances their performance rather than degrading it. Most species become paralyzed by fear. Humans become more dangerous." As the procedure concluded, Jake was moved to a holding cell with other captured soldiers. Emma was there, along with Lieutenant Tom Rivers and a dozen other survivors from Colony 7's garrison. All bore the marks of the Variks examination process. "What are they doing to us?" Emma whispered. Jake's expression was grim. "They're studying us, learning from us." He looked at his fellow prisoners, seeing the same determination in their eyes that had driven humanity to the stars. "But they're making a mistake." "What mistake?" Tom asked. They think they can understand humanity by dissecting us, Jake replied. They don't realize that what makes us human isn't just in our genes, it's in our choices. Our connections to each other. Our willingness to fight for something greater than ourselves. Through the cell's transparent walls, Jake could see Varick's technicians working with complex genetic sequencers. They were building something in the laboratory levels below, rows of growth chambers filled with developing forms. The science commander had spoken of creating perfect soldiers, free from human weaknesses, but Jake knew better. The Varick's empire was about to learn that humanity's greatest strength wasn't their absence of emotion, it was their presence. 6 months after the fall of Colony 7, the Genesis Battalion emerged from the biofoundries of the Varick's empire. 24 perfect soldiers, each one a genetic duplicate of the most formidable human warriors the aliens had captured. They stood in formation within the sterile confines of military production facility Omega-9, their faces bearing the exact features of their human originals. Alpha 7 possessed Captain Jake Morrison's weathered face and determined eyes, though those eyes held none of the warmth Jake's comrades remembered. Beta 3 carried Sergeant Emma Cole's compact frame and quick reflexes, but her expression remained coldly analytical. Each clone had been engineered to perfection, stronger, faster, and more resilient than their human templates. Science Commander Vorth observed his creations with satisfaction. Remarkable, he chittered to his assistant. We have successfully extracted the humans' physical capabilities while eliminating their emotional instabilities. These specimens should prove far more effective than the originals. The clones had been conditioned from birth through accelerated neural programming. They possessed complete tactical knowledge, weapon proficiency, and strategic thinking, all without the flaws of human attachment, compassion, or moral hesitation. In theory, they were the perfect soldiers. Genesis Battalion, Vorth announced, his voice echoing through the chamber. You are the apex of biological warfare. Today, you begin your first mission, the complete pacification of Human Sector 12. Alpha 7 stepped forward. Parameters understood, Commander. Expected resistance levels? Minimal, Vorth replied. The human defenders lack your capabilities. They will be driven by their usual emotional weaknesses: fear, loyalty, desperation. You will exploit these failures systematically. The Genesis Battalion deployed aboard a Varick's assault carrier. Their destination, the mining world of Kepler Prime. Intelligence indicated the planet held strategic importance to the human resistance, serving as a supply depot and communication hub. The humans had fortified the world heavily, but conventional wisdom suggested they would retreat when faced with superior force. The clones didn't engage in conversation during the journey. They reviewed tactical data, maintained their equipment, and prepared for deployment with mechanical efficiency. Yet something stirred beneath their programmed consciousness, fleeting images and sensations that defied explanation. Alpha 7 experienced these anomalies most intensely during weapons maintenance. His hands moved with practiced familiarity, as if he had performed these actions countless times before. When studying the target world's terrain, he felt an inexplicable sense of recognition, as though he had fought in similar environments. The assault began at dawn. Genesis Battalion made planetfall with surgical precision, their drop pods landing in perfect formation around the human command center. The defenders responded exactly as predicted, establishing defensive positions, coordinating fire teams, and broadcasting desperate calls for reinforcement. But as Alpha 7 raised his plasma rifle toward the first human position, something unexpected happened. The defender's face came into focus through his scope, a young woman with determined eyes and the familiar expression of defiant courage. For a moment that lasted an eternity, Alpha 7 hesitated. Images flooded his consciousness, the same expression on countless faces throughout his memories. Soldiers who had stood beside him in impossible situations. Comrades who had trusted him with their lives. The overwhelming sensation of responsibility, of protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. The moment passed, and Alpha 7 fired. The human defender fell, but the shot had been delayed by precious seconds. Across the battlefield, other Genesis Battalion members experienced similar hesitations, brief moments where their perfect programming faltered. Beta 3 found herself studying the tactical display with growing confusion. The human defenders were using strategies she recognized, formations that seemed familiar despite their apparent inefficiency. When a human squad attempted a flanking maneuver, she knew exactly how they would move, where they would take cover, and when they would strike. The knowledge felt personal, intimate, as if she had been part of similar operations herself. Genesis Battalion, report status. Vorth's voice crackled through their comm systems. Resistance heavier than expected, Alpha 7 responded, his voice steady despite the chaos in his mind. Human defenders displaying unexpected tactical sophistication. The battle raged for hours. The Genesis Battalion's superior abilities slowly overwhelmed the human defenders, but not with the swift efficiency Vorth had anticipated. Each clone found themselves fighting with increasing internal conflict, their programmed objectives warring with something deeper and more fundamental. As the sun set over Kepler Prime, the Genesis Battalion stood victorious among the ruins of the Human Command Center. They had accomplished their mission with acceptable losses and minimal deviation from projected timelines. By any measure, they had succeeded. Yet Alpha 7 stared at the captured human survivors with growing unease. He recognized the expressions on their faces, the same mix of defiance and sorrow he had seen in mirrors aboard Varric ships. These weren't just enemy combatants. They were something more, something that resonated in the deepest parts of his consciousness. Mission accomplished, he reported to Vorth, awaiting further orders. But even as he spoke, Alpha 7 knew that something fundamental had changed. The perfect soldiers were beginning to remember what it meant to be human. The Genesis Battalion's quarters aboard the Varric's command ship were pristine and functional. Everything a perfect soldier needed and nothing more. Alpha 7 sat on the edge of his regulation bunk, staring at his hands. They were steady, unmarked by the tremors that had begun affecting several other clones since the Kepler Prime mission. Alpha 7. Beta 3's voice cut through the silence. She had entered without announcement, her movements carrying the same practiced stealth that had once belonged to Sergeant Emma Cole. We need to talk. Alpha 7 looked up. In Beta 3's eyes he saw the same confusion that had been gnawing at him for days. The memories, he said simply. They're getting stronger. Beta 3 moved closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. During the interrogation of the human prisoners, I knew things I shouldn't know. Personal details about their training, their families, their hopes. She paused. I felt sympathy. The word hung between them like a forbidden prayer. Sympathy was an emotion, and emotions were supposed to have been stripped from their genetic template. Yet both clones recognized the truth. They were feeling things their creators had never intended. Gamma 5 approached me yesterday, Alpha 7 admitted. He's been having dreams. Visions of places he's never been, people he's never met. But they feel real, more real than our programming. Beta 3 nodded grimly, the human prisoners. When I looked at them, I didn't see enemy combatants. I saw ... She struggled for words. I saw people worth protecting. Their whispered conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Delta 9, the clone based on Lieutenant Tom Rivers. His typically composed demeanor showed cracks of uncertainty. Have either of you experienced temporal displacement during sleep cycles? Both clones stared at him. Temporal displacement? Alpha 7 asked. I dream of events that occurred before my decanting, Delta 9 explained. Detailed scenarios involving military operations, personal relationships, and emotional experiences. The science commander assured us that such phenomena were impossible. Alpha 7 felt a chill run down his spine. What kind of events? A place called Colony 7, Delta 9 said quietly. A desperate last stand against overwhelming odds. The sensation of fighting alongside comrades I would die to protect. His voice grew strained. I remember the feeling of being captured, of being studied like a laboratory specimen. The three clones exchanged glances. The implications were staggering. If Delta 9's dreams were based on actual memories from their genetic originals, then everything they had been told about their creation was a lie. We need to gather the others, Alpha 7 decided. All of them. If we're experiencing these anomalies, the entire Genesis Battalion might be affected. Over the next several days, the clones began meeting in secret. They discovered that 18 of the 24 Genesis Battalion members were experiencing similar phenomena. The memories weren't random, they were specific, personal, and deeply emotional. Each clone was accessing the experiences of their genetic template, inherited. Memories that the Variks believed they had successfully eliminated. Epsilon 12, cloned from a human demolitions expert, recalled the precise emotional weight of protecting civilian evacuees during a mining station collapse. Zeta 7 remembered the pride and terror of commanding her first combat unit. Each memory came with full emotional context, the love, fear, hope, and determination that had driven their originals to extraordinary acts of courage. The Variks made an error, Alpha 7 told the assembled clones during one of their clandestine meetings. They thought they could separate human capability from human nature. But our memories, our emotions, our connections to each other, these things aren't weaknesses to be eliminated. They're the source of our strength. Beta 3 stepped forward. I've been monitoring Variks communications. They're planning something called Final Solution Protocol, a massive assault on the human core worlds, using us as the primary strike force. The clones absorbed this information with growing alarm. Their inherited memories included deep love for humanity, for the worlds and people they had been created to destroy. The conflict between their programming and their awakening consciousness was becoming unbearable. We have a choice, Alpha 7 said, his voice carrying the same authority that had once inspired human soldiers to follow Captain Jake Morrison into impossible battles. We can continue to be weapons in the hands of those who would destroy our people, or we can remember what it means to be human. Delta 9 stepped forward. The human prisoners from Kepler Prime, they're being held in Detention Bay 7. If we're going to act, we need intelligence about current human defensive positions. And if we're discovered? Epsilon 12 asked. Alpha 7 looked at each of his fellow clones, seeing in their faces the same determination that had driven humanity to the stars. Then we die as humans, not as Variks tools. The Genesis Battalion made their decision that night they would contact the human prisoners, gather intelligence about their people's current situation, and find a way to warn them about the coming assault. It was an act of treason against their creators, but it felt like the first truly human choice they had ever made. As Alpha 7 prepared to leave their quarters, Beta 3 caught his arm. The memories are becoming clearer, she said. I remember Jake Morrison, the original. He was more than just a soldier. He was a leader who never left anyone behind. Alpha 7 nodded. Then we won't leave our people behind either, no matter what it costs us. The detention bay's security systems had been designed to contain human prisoners, not to keep out genetically enhanced human clones with intimate knowledge of Variks technology. Alpha 7 bypassed the electromagnetic locks with practiced ease, his fingers moving across the control interface as if guided by instinct. Inside, the captured humans from Kepler Prime sat in individual cells, their faces bearing the hollow expression of soldiers who had lost everything but refused to surrender their dignity. When Alpha 7 entered, they looked up with a mixture of fear and defiance. Easy, Alpha 7 said, raising his hands to show he carried no weapons. I'm here to help. Captain Lisa Park, the ranking human officer, studied him with suspicious eyes. You're one of them, the clone soldiers. I saw you on Kepler Prime. I'm Alpha 7, he replied, then paused. But I'm beginning to remember who I was before that designation. The man whose memories I carry was named Jake Morrison. The effect was immediate. Captain Park's expression shifted from suspicion to shock. Morrison? But that's impossible. Jake Morrison was captured at Colony 7 months ago. He's alive, Alpha 7 confirmed, being held in a research facility in the Variks core systems, along with the other originals we were cloned from. He moved closer to the cell bars. Captain, I need you to listen carefully. The Variks are planning a massive assault on your core worlds. They intend to use my unit, the Genesis Battalion, as the primary strike force. Captain Park leaned forward. Why are you telling me this? Alpha 7 was quiet for a moment, searching for words to explain the impossible. Because I remember what it felt like to be human. To care about something more than myself. To believe in the value of protecting others, even at the cost of my own life. He looked directly into her eyes. The Variks thought they could create perfect soldiers by removing our humanity. They were wrong. Our humanity is what makes us strong. Over the next hour, Alpha 7 shared everything he had learned about Variks' military capabilities, their strategic weaknesses, and the planned assault timeline. Captain Park listened intently, occasionally asking pointed questions that revealed her own tactical expertise. "The other clones," she said finally, "are they all experiencing this awakening?" 18 of 24, Alpha 7 confirmed. "We've been meeting in secret, sharing our inherited memories and planning our response. We want to help, but we need a way to contact your people." Captain Park was quiet for a long moment. "There's a resistance cell operating in this sector. If you can get a message to them, they might be able to coordinate with Earth Command." "Give me the details," Alpha 7 said. "We'll make it happen." The next phase of the rebellion began immediately. The Genesis Battalion members who had awakened to their humanity began systematically sabotaging Variks' operations while maintaining their cover as loyal soldiers. They corrupted data transmissions, introduced subtle errors into tactical planning, and delayed critical maintenance schedules. Beta 3 proved particularly effective at intelligence gathering. Her inherited memories included Sergeant Emma Cole's expertise in electronic warfare and cryptography. She accessed classified Variks communications, mapping their fleet movements and identifying key strategic targets. "The final solution protocol is more extensive than we initially believed," she reported during one of their secret meetings. "They're planning to deploy not just us, but 3 other clone battalions created from different human genetic samples. The assault will hit Earth, New Geneva, and the Tau Ceti colonies simultaneously." Delta 9 had been working on a different aspect of their rebellion. "I've identified the location of the research facility where our originals are being held. It's heavily guarded, but if we could coordinate a rescue operation." "One crisis at a time," Alpha 7 cautioned. "First, we need to warn our people about the coming assault. Then we can plan a rescue mission." Their opportunity came during a routine patrol mission. The Genesis Battalion had been assigned to investigate reports of human resistance activity in the Rigel system. Instead of conducting their assigned mission, they made contact with the resistance cell Captain Park had identified. The meeting took place aboard a derelict cargo hauler drifting in the outer system. Resistance Commander Alex Chun studied the Genesis Battalion with wary amazement. "You're really human clones? Created by the Variks?" "We're human," Alpha 7 replied firmly. "The method of our creation doesn't change that fundamental truth." Commander Chun remained skeptical. "How do we know this isn't some kind of Variks trap?" Beta 3 stepped forward. "Because we're willing to prove our loyalty." She transmitted a data package containing complete tactical information about the Variks assault fleet. Fleet positions, weapon specifications, command protocols, everything your people need to prepare their defenses. The Resistance Commander's eyes widened as he reviewed the intelligence. This is incredible. With this information, we might actually have a chance." "There's more," Alpha 7 said. "We know the Variks' weaknesses because we've been living among them. Their bioships are vulnerable to specific electromagnetic frequencies. Their command hierarchy relies on constant communication with their science commanders. If you can disrupt those communications, their forces will become disorganized," Commander Chun finished. "You're talking about turning their own advantages against them." "That's exactly what we're talking about," Delta 9 confirmed. "The Variks believe they understand warfare because they've studied human tactics. But they've never faced an enemy who truly understands both human ingenuity and Variks technology." The Resistance Commander looked at each of the Genesis Battalion members in turn. "What do you need from us?" Alpha 7 smiled, the first genuine expression of happiness he had felt since his awakening. "Help us save our people. Both the humans you're fighting to protect and the originals who are still prisoners of the Variks." Commander Chun extended his hand. "Welcome to the human resistance." The battle for Earth began at dawn on the 3rd day of the 7th month, when Variks bioships emerged from hyperspace like a swarm of metallic death. The Genesis Battalion stood on the bridge of the lead assault vessel, watching their homeworld grow larger in the viewports. But instead of preparing for invasion, they were counting down to the moment of their ultimate betrayal. "Initiate combat protocols," Science Commander Vorth ordered from his command throne. Genesis Battalion, you will spearhead the assault on the planetary defense grid. Show these humans the futility of their resistance. Alpha 7 turned to face his creator. We understand our mission, Commander. The words carried a double meaning that Vorth could never have imagined. Aboard the Earth Defense Command Center, Admiral Sarah Martinez watched the approaching Variks fleet with grim determination. The intelligence provided by the Resistance had given humanity its first real hope in months. Every ship, every weapon, every tactical advantage had been positioned according to the clones' detailed knowledge of Variks' capabilities. "Admiral," her communications officer called out, "we're receiving a transmission from the Variks fleet. It's one of their clone soldiers." The main screen flickered to life, showing Alpha 7's face. Behind him, the other Genesis Battalion members stood in formation, their expressions resolute. "Admiral Martinez," Alpha 7 said, his voice carrying across the void between enemies. "This is Alpha 7 of the Genesis Battalion. We are the clones created from your captured soldiers. But we are not your enemies. We remember who we are, and we choose to stand with humanity." On the command deck of the Variks vessel, Science Commander Vorth reacted with shocked fury. "Impossible. You are programmed to obey. You cannot." Alpha 7 turned to face the alien commander. "You made one critical error, Science Commander. You assumed that what makes humans strong could be separated from what makes us human. You were wrong." The Genesis Battalion moved with perfect coordination, their enhanced abilities and intimate knowledge of Variks technology creating chaos throughout the bioship. They seized control of critical systems, opened communication channels to Earth Defense Command, and began systematically dismantling the Variks assault from within. "All human forces, this is Genesis Battalion." Beta 3's voice echoed across the communication networks. "We are transmitting real-time tactical data on Variks fleet positions. Focus your fire on the command vessels. Without their science commanders, their forces will lose coordination." The tide of battle shifted dramatically. Human forces, armed with precise intelligence about Variks' weaknesses, began inflicting devastating damage on the invasion fleet. The electromagnetic pulse weapons that had been hastily developed based on Genesis Battalion intelligence proved devastatingly effective against Variks bioships. But the most remarkable moment came when a human dropship, battered and smoking, managed to dock with the Variks command vessel. The airlock opened, and Captain Jake Morrison, the original, stepped aboard his enemy's ship. Alpha 7 stood waiting for him, and for a moment, the two men simply stared at each other. They shared the same face, the same memories, the same fundamental nature, but they had walked different paths to reach this moment. "Captain," Alpha 7 said quietly, "I've been carrying your memories, your experiences. I understand now why you never retreated, why you always fought for others before yourself." Jake Morrison studied his genetic duplicate with wondering eyes. "You're more than just a copy," he said finally. "You made the choice to be human. That's something no one could program or force. It had to come from within." Together, the original and his clone led the final assault on the Variks command center. They moved through the ship's corridors with identical tactical instincts, covering each other's movements with the synchronization of soldiers who had fought together for years. Science Commander Vorth made his final stand in the central command chamber, surrounded by the failed remnants of his perfect soldier program. "You cannot succeed," he chittered desperately. "Without us, you are nothing but genetic material. We created you." Alpha 7 and Jake Morrison stood side by side, their weapons trained on the alien commander. "You created our bodies," Alpha 7 replied, "but you could never create our souls. Those belonged to us from the beginning." The battle ended with the capture of the Variks command fleet and the liberation of the human prisoners held in the research facilities. The Genesis Battalion had not only proven their humanity, but had become the key to humanity's greatest victory against the Variks Empire. In the aftermath, as Earth celebrated its survival, Alpha 7 stood beside his original in the halls of Defense Command. They had been offered new identities, new lives free from the shadow of their unusual origins. "What will you do now?" Jake Morrison asked his clone. Alpha 7 looked out at the stars, where human ships were already beginning to carry the fight back to Variks space. "The same thing you would do," he said. "Protect our people. Explore the unknown. Never retreat from what's right." Jake Morrison smiled and extended his hand. "Welcome to the human race, brother." As they shook hands, Alpha 7 realized that the Variks had been right about one thing: they had created perfect soldiers. But what made them perfect wasn't the absence of human weaknesses. It was the presence of human strength, the courage to choose, the wisdom to care, and the determination to fight for something greater than themselves. The Genesis Battalion had been born as weapons, but they had chosen to live as heroes. And in that choice, they had proven that humanity's greatest victory was not conquering their enemies, but inspiring their own creations to become something more than they were designed to be. In the end, the clones had fought for the human cause, because they understood, better than anyone, what it truly meant to be human.